Whispers of the Past. Chapter 1. Emma James didn't know the name of the man sitting across from her. He hadn't introduced himself during the interview, just looked at her resume for a few long, uncomfortable moments before saying, "You'll be hearing from us." His voice was low and controlled, the kind that made her stomach twist without understanding why. Something about the way he looked at her, like he was dissecting her, as if he already knew every answer to every question, left her unsteady. She left the glass-panelled office with flushed cheeks and a stack of doubts. She had applied to the position out of desperation, a personal assistant job for a CEO of an architectural firm. It came with housing, a mansion on the edge of the city, tucked behind tall iron gates. The pay was good, too good, but she needed it. Her grandmother had taken a sudden turn, and the hospital bills were eating them alive. Emma had been working double shifts at the diner just to keep the lights on. This job would solve everything if she could survive the intensity of that man's eyes. She didn't know his name, but he knew hers, and he had known it for years. Sebastian Reed sat in the same leather chair long after she left. The same girl, the same wide amber eyes, the same soft mouth that had once laughed at him, or so he remembered. Her cousin had been cruel, yes, but Emma had stood by and said nothing. She had watched the scene unfold as if he were nothing more than the help. And now she was sitting in his office, hands folded, trying to hold herself together like she wasn't a thread away from unraveling. She hadn't recognized him. Of course she hadn't. People like her never remembered people like him, but he remembered everything. The feel of soil in his hands as he dug up roses in her grandmother's garden. The humiliation of being dragged out by the estate manager. The sting of betrayal when he'd realized someone had planted jewelry in his shed, and no one, not even Emma, had spoken in his defense. He had vowed never to return to that life again. And he hadn't. In 10 years, he'd built his company from the ground up. His name was on buildings now. He was the man in the suit, not the boy covered in dirt. He had power, wealth, control. And now fate had delivered her to his doorstep. Emma got the call 2 hours later. "You've been hired," the voice said crisply. "Your employment is contingent on relocation. The estate has staff housing. You'll be expected to live on site by Monday." She blinked. "Oh, wow, thank you. And the CEO's name is?" "Mr. Sebastian Reed." The phone almost slipped from her hand. Reed. That name stirred something. Not quite memory, but unease. Still, she swallowed it down. She couldn't afford to be picky. Not now. She packed her life into 2 suitcases that weekend, said goodbye to the small, dim apartment she had called home for 3 years, kissed her grandmother's hand and promised to visit daily. And on Monday morning, she stood at the foot of the estate she once used to run through as a child, only now it belonged to someone else. The gates creaked open, and a black car pulled up to bring her in. The first time Sebastian saw her standing on the front steps of the mansion, wind catching in her hair, a suitcase in each hand, he didn't smile. He opened the door himself. "Welcome," he said coolly, voice void of warmth. "I trust the accommodations will suit you." Emma looked up at him, brow furrowing. "Have we met before?" He stared at her for one long, silent second. "No," he lied. Then he stepped aside and let her in. Chapter 2. The mansion was like a museum of restraint, all marble floors, steel finishes, and sharp lines that echoed Sebastian Reed himself, cold, controlled, immaculate. Emma followed him inside, her footsteps sounding too loud in the vast foyer. "I'll show you to your quarters," he said, without looking at her. "You'll find the staff are discreet. Meals are prepared and delivered if you prefer to eat in your room. There's a schedule for tasks. Don't deviate from it without notifying me." She blinked. "Right, thank you. Mr. Reed." "Sebastian will do," he said, with that same detached tone that somehow still left her flushed. The guest wing was too generous to be called staff housing. Her suite had a view of the hills, a plush bed, and a little reading nook with a window seat. She hadn't had this kind of silence in years. It was almost unsettling. "You'll start tomorrow. Be in my office at 8 sharp." And with that, he left her alone. No small talk, no pleasantries. Just like the man she'd met during the interview, polished, unreadable, and quietly intimidating. The next morning, she arrived 5 minutes early. He didn't comment, just motioned for her to sit and handed her a binder. "This is the schedule for the week. Read it. I expect you to anticipate my needs before I ask." "Like a mind reader," she muttered. His gaze lifted, a flicker of something in his eyes, maybe amusement, maybe challenge. "I've never had one of those," he said, "but we'll see how close you get." It was the closest thing to a joke he'd made since she arrived. The first few days passed in awkward rhythm. She fetched files, took notes, sorted through endless calls. He never raised his voice, but the weight of his silences felt heavier than any reprimand. And yet, it wasn't just coldness. There were moments when she caught him watching her, just for a second too long. When his gaze dipped to her mouth as she chewed on her pen cap. When their hands brushed and he didn't immediately pull away. Each time it happened, she told herself she was imagining it. One night, after a long meeting, she brought him tea instead of coffee. He didn't look up. "Trying to break me of old habits?" "I read somewhere it helps with stress," she said quietly. "You've looked tense." For a moment he was very still. Then he said, "Don't mistake familiarity for concern, Miss James." Her heart thudded. I wasn't. But she had been. She couldn't help it. Sebastian Reed unsettled her, but he also fascinated her. There was something behind that perfectly composed facade, something wounded, something wild. He didn't sleep much. She knew that because his office light was always on when she passed in the middle of the night to grab water or tea. One evening, she found herself lingering in the hallway. She didn't knock, but the door opened anyway. "You're awake," he said, voice low. He wasn't wearing a tie for once, just a crisp shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked different, more real. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted. He stepped back. "Come in." The office was quieter than usual. Diamond soys. Just a desk lamp lit the space. "I don't usually invite company this late," he said, pouring a drink. "Do you usually invite your assistants in at all?" she asked, before she could stop herself. That flicker again in his eyes, like a spark waiting to catch. "No," he said. "But you're not usual." She swallowed. "I meant that professionally," he added, almost as an afterthought. But the pause lingered between them. He took a sip of whiskey. She stared out the window at the dark hills beyond, and for a brief moment, the silence between them wasn't awkward. It was charged. He stepped closer. "I should go," she whispered. "You should," he agreed, but neither of them moved. Chapter 3. Emma didn't know how she made it back to her room that night without combusting. Sebastian hadn't touched her. He hadn't said anything inappropriate. And yet, something between them had shifted, like the moment just before lightning strikes. The next morning, he was back to his cold, clipped self. "You're late," he said when she entered the office at 8:01. She blinked, only by... No excuses. His tone cut clean through her. "Tardiness reflects a lack of respect, not just for my time, but for this role." Her stomach sank. Understood. But his eyes didn't match the bite in his voice. They flicked over her face like he was searching for something. Some confirmation that last night meant something to her, too. Emma didn't give it to him. She tucked her hair behind her ear, lifted her chin, and nodded. "I'll do better." That afternoon, they were supposed to go over site blueprints in his home study. It was larger than the office and somehow felt more intimate. Low leather chairs, built-in bookshelves, a fire flickering even though it was warm out. He motioned for her to sit beside him instead of across the room. Less formal, he said simply. We'll be here a while. They worked in silence for a while, their shoulders almost brushing, his scent too rich and close. She tried not to look at the way his forearms flexed as he wrote, or the way his throat moved when he drank his coffee, but when she dropped her pen and reached for it at the same time as he did, their fingers touched. She froze. So did he. His voice was low, unreadable. "You're distracted." Her heart was racing. "You're very hard to ignore." He looked up at her then, slowly. "Then don't ignore me." Her breath caught. "Sebastian, I haven't touched you," he said, his voice just above a whisper. "I've been polite, professional. But if I'm being honest, Emma, I think about it. Every time you walk into a room." She swallowed hard. "Why tell me now?" His gaze dropped to her lips. "Because I'm tired of pretending I don't want you." Then, slowly, as if waiting for her to stop him, he leaned in. And she didn't. His kiss was heat and control unraveling. His hand slid to the back of her neck, holding her in place as if he couldn't bear the thought of her pulling away. And she didn't want to. Emma didn't think, she only felt. The rush of his lips moving against hers, the way he kissed like he'd been waiting years for it. He pulled her into his lap, and for the first time in weeks, her thoughts went quiet. It didn't matter that this was a bad idea, that they worked together, that he'd been cruel to her. Because this heat, this connection was real. When he finally pulled back, his voice was hoarse. "You should go, before I forget everything I told myself about lines and limits." She stood, shaken and breathless, her legs unsteady, and before she could say anything else, he turned away from her. Dismissed. The next day, he acted as if it hadn't happened. Back to business, back to cold. But Emma wasn't the same. Every look, every word between them felt like a match poised to spark. And she wasn't sure how much longer either of them could pretend. Chapter 4. The first time it happened, it was a kiss that never really ended. The second time, it was a storm. It started with a late night in the study again, a contract to review, a joke that made her laugh too loud, a look he gave her that made her forget how to breathe. "You shouldn't be here this late," he murmured, voice taut. "Then tell me to leave," she challenged, even though her fingers were already brushing his. He didn't, and when she leaned in, he met her halfway. The second kiss became a third. The third became tangled sheets, desperate hands, whispered names in the dark. Sebastian wasn't careful with her. He was consuming. Every time he touched her, it was with the urgency of a man starving, as if every moment he'd spent holding back had unraveled all at once. But it wasn't just lust, it was deeper, dangerous. He lingered after. He watched her while she slept, brushing a thumb across her cheek when he thought she didn't know. She felt it, even when he didn't say anything, even when he got up before she woke and disappeared into his own room. The days blurred. Work became a tightrope. She still took notes, ran his schedule, sat across from him in conference calls. But now there was a secret between them. Sometimes he brushed her lower back as he passed. Sometimes she found herself watching the line of his jaw during meetings, remembering what it felt like when he whispered her name against her skin. And sometimes he kissed her when no one was looking. Once in the hallway, quick and hungry. Once in the elevator, silent and slow. And once during a rainstorm against the wall of his office as thunder rolled outside. But then she heard it. Overheard, actually, on the phone late one evening when she returned to the house after visiting her grandmother in the hospital. "I'll handle it," Sebastian said. His voice was tight, low. "Yes, the board wants it. No, don't send the flowers. That's not necessary. I'll be at the engagement dinner, but this is still just business." Emma froze just outside the door. Engagement dinner! Her heart slammed in her chest. She hadn't known what they were, she hadn't dared ask. But deep down she'd thought he might feel something. that all the touches, the quiet glances, the way he said her name like it was the only thing keeping him grounded, it meant something. But what if it didn't? What if she was nothing more than a passing obsession? One he could hide behind locked doors before walking into a perfectly arranged marriage. That night, he came to her room. He kissed her like nothing had changed, like she was still his secret piece. And she let him, even though her heart cracked with every touch. She left the next morning, resigned, no note, just silence.